we have this beautiful princess line, and I've lined up the pieces the way that they were created on top of the original pattern. And we're responding to the way it fits. So if I move these out of the way, right here, when I line that up together, this area is just too curvy. And on a shorter person, you want to make it shorter. And the back has too much extra ease. If you don't have prominent shoulder bones, you need to take it out right there. So the way I'm going to solve that problem is I'm going to create a perpendicular line right here so that I have a reference point. And then I'm going to create line copy that line. And if I want to take out, I'm going to put that one on this one. And now I have it I'm attached to the cursor, but I've got my values over here, and I want it exactly in the same place, but I want it an inch down in the X direction. So if I'm watching that, that looks like an inch, maybe a little less, because I don't really want a full inch out. So I'm looking for 3/4. So now I'm going to set that down. So I have a line on each piece that's helping me see where I need to take out ease. And I could do that same thing down through the body area, and I probably would do this exact same alteration right through the waist area and take out a 1/2 inch total on all 4 pieces. And on the back, I'm getting some extra out in the shoulder area. So in order to do that, I'm going to come up to the the advanced fullness feature, and I want it to be parallel fullness. So this is my parallel fullness, and I'm going to create slash lines from the pivot end to the open end. Well, it's parallel, so it really doesn't matter. But and I don't want it on that line, I want it on the body. So I'm going to come over to here and here. Oh, okay. So I'm going to back up for a minute. I've got seam allowance on here. So I'm going to swap my seam allowance before I make any changes to any of the pieces because, oh, well. I hate when I do that when people are watching. It's fine if I do it alone. Okay, so they're all swapped now. So now I can go back to what I was doing. And I may end up wishing I had put more markings on here. I probably want to copy this line onto the side body. I can tell that's going to be a problem. So create line copy, and I'm just going to copy this line, say OK, put it on the side body, say OK, and cancel so that it ends up in the same place. Okay, so advanced, parallel, create the slash line, and I'm looking at this, and I can tell that this piece is actually not quite perfectly on the straight of grain, but I can fix that later. And then I want to do my parallel fullness right there. So end selection, say OK, the location to remain stationary. Let's choose this part. And the internal lines to move, I'm not moving any of those. So I'm going to say OK again, and now it's starting to move. Well, I'm going to bring that line down until it's on top of the other one, and I close it. I could have... Okay, so that's kind of making me nervous. When I slide this to the side, I'm going to actually, instead of that guideline that I made, I'm going to use the distance number that you can see over there on the side of the screen. So now it's smaller, and you can actually see that it ended up on the line that I wanted it to be on. And I would need to come in and clean this. So I would want to blend a smooth line between here, and that would be create 2-point curve. And I'm going to come down from the edge a little bit, and I'm going to blend into the body, and then I'm going to split the difference between the two. So I would swap that line out and then swap my seam allowance back. And I also am concerned that this isn't a straight line. So it might not be a big deal right now. It doesn't show, but you can see that it's not straight because it's got that brightness right there. And if I go into verify, nope, view, intermediate points, and touch this piece, I can see that I've got intermediate points all along the back. That's fine for a curved line, but when you've got a line that's supposed to be straight, it works out much better in a marker, and it makes it foldable if you delete all of those intermediate points. So I would go to modify delete point and just pick out those little intermediate points until they're gone. And then the line will become straight because 2 points determine a line, and it makes it straight to get rid of those. So I'll move on from that. So now I'm going to do the same thing with this one. It might be a little bit more awkward because of the curve shapes, but back to advanced, tapered, fullness. Be careful not to go to pleats. You want tapered fullness, parallel fullness. And I'm just going to do the same thing again and use that guideline. Oh, but I've got the wrong piece. And I'm just going to move it. I want to make sure that I catch the side of the body and not my helper line. So I've chosen my slash line. My location that's remaining stationary is here. No internal lines are moving. And then I'm going to watch that number over there again. And so I should have done it by measurement and done exactly 0.75. So this is okay, but I'm doing the same thing again. Create a 2-point curve. This one actually doesn't look too bad. You can clean that up a little bit, and then I'm starting high and coming low and splitting the difference. So that would get swapped too, and that will take out an amount. It only affects the back. It doesn't affect the collar. It could affect the sleeve. So I would actually take this and sew that much out and then sew the sleeve back in if I wanted to do fitting on this and make changes to that pattern. You could spend the time to do that so the next time you use the pattern. But before I cut out a new one, I would just unpick the sleeve at the top, sew that in as a seam, and blend the line and sew it back together and squeeze as much out of that sample as you can. And then when you sew the sleeve back in, if you've got more ease than you want, then we can just unpick it and pin fit the sleeve in and change the cap height a little bit. But you want to make sure this fits before you respond to the sleeve. Okay, so that same operation would be right through here, and I I would actually maybe put a line in so you know what's straight, but switch to value and subtract with that same feature, advanced parallel. I would take out exactly 0.5 in the same place on every single piece at the same level, because if you try to take more out of one than another, you're going to screw up your balance. And see how that works. And if there's more of a problem through there, then we would address that separately. Okay, so the other thing that was a problem was right here. And this pattern has a very sharp curve on it. And we also need a little bit more darting. So if I split the line where that notch is, modify line, split, that's a 1/2 inch. Maybe we want to take out 3/8. So I'm going to undo that split and I'm going to create another notch. I'm going to create another notch. And I'm in create notch. I want it exactly 3/8 of an inch down, and I'm just using it as a marking for reference. So I'm not going to touch the point. I'm going to right click and say distance from point. The point I'm measuring from is this one, and that's counterclockwise, so I have to give it a negative number. So that's minus 0.375, and there's my notch. So that's all I need, so I'm going to say OK. And then I'm going to add a line right here from where that notch is, just as a reference point. So I'm connecting to the notch, and I'm going to blend it over here, and that will give me more, when I split this line and swap it, that will give me more dart. But the more frustrating part is the shape of that curve just doesn't look right on this body. So I'm going to connect with this line and this line, and I'm going to give it a more gradual curve right there. I could even be more gradual than that, but you'll want to sit down with the sample and hold it and maybe look at it and put a pin in it. But I think that's going to be more flattering if you cut that off and swap that. So those are the alterations for that one, but the button placement and everything looks great. If you want to do a similar alteration to that on a basic piece rather than a princess line, you would do the same thing and advanced parallel fullness, come straight across, switch to value, say OK, location to remain stationary. No, well, no, I'm not moving any internal lines. And then I'm going to go with negative 0.75. See how much nicer and more accurate that is. Then I would blend that armhole. But if in addition to that I wanted to put a yoke in, I would come up to create a 2-point, and I'd start on perpendicular, decide how far down I want my yoke to be, and then switch out of value. And I'm making a whole line on both sides. If I only want half of that, I can make it half. Blend this before you separate the yoke. And then the higher you make the yoke, the more similar it will be to this dart. But if I go into advanced, manipulate dart and select the dart to rotate, rotation point location, hold line, and my opening point, I'm going to choose this line right here because that's where I want it to be, but if well, we'll talk about that. I don't want any internal lines to move, so I'm just going to say OK, and now my dart is right here. So instead of having the dart right there, that's why I said if this line was higher, then the yoke would fit more precisely with the dart, but you don't always see them that way. So I would ignore the dart placement right there and create a 2-point curve that comes from that new corner to the same distance I had right there. And now my yoke is a curved line sewing into a straight line, and it will be visually level across the back when it's finished. And you can go ahead and put a notch on this line to begin with, so you have a reference point, and when you trace those two pieces off, and you'll ignore this, so if I were creating a yoke, I would trace it off like that. I don't need any of the lines. Now it's right here, and the notch was on the other side, but it comes out in the same place, so when I trace off the lower half, it will have that same matching notch if you remember to do that before you separate your pieces.